Chapter 6, Read Aloud for the Odyssey. We sailed in silence over the desolate sea. It seemed that our journey had been doomed from the start, and now great Poseidon himself was against us. We had every reason to be subdued. After 2 days, we came to an extraordinary floating island surrounded by a bronze wall, encasing tall cliffs that rose up sheer above it. We moored our ships in the harbor, and with some trepidation after our previous encounters, climbed the stone steps that led to the city. We should not have worried. The island belonged to Aeolus, the favorite of the gods, chosen by Zeus to be the guardian of the four winds. He had treated us to a splendid feast, and of our checkered journey home, he presented me with the perfect gift. It was a bag of strong hide tied with a silver cord that contained 3 of the 4 winds. Only the west wind was left free, and the west wind would blow us home. When we were safely on the shores of Ithaca, I was to release the other winds, but, and Aeolus stressed how important this was, not a moment before. I blame myself for the disaster that overtook us. For 9 days and nights, the west wind blew us toward Ithaca. On the morning of the 10th day, we could see our own countrymen tending to their flocks on the hills, and the smoke of 100 fires curling over the island. Sure that our voyage had come to an end, I relaxed into a deep sleep. I had been at the rudder for 9 days and nights without closing my eyes once, determined that nothing should go wrong. If only my vigilance had lasted a little longer. As soon as I was asleep, my men began to talk amongst themselves. I suppose they were carried away by the sight of Ithaca, drunk with the anticipation of the joys of coming home. Greedy, pig-headed fools. They were to never know these joys. They decided to empty the bag Aeolus had given me and share out the contents equally between them. They all got equal shares, all right. We all did. Once the winds were loose, they blew up a tempest that drove us away from the Ithacan shore. I woke to find us lost on the open sea. My men were weeping over their folly. As for myself, I felt like hurling myself into the raging sea to end it all then and there. Within 3 days, the winds had driven us back to Aeolus's floating island. I explained what had happened and begged him to help us again. But now Aeolus would have nothing to do with us. Get out of here at once, unluckiest of men. Your story shows that the gods are against you, and the God-forsaken are not welcome here. We returned to our ships with his cold words ringing in our ears, and, sick at heart, we sailed away from the island. The winds were unpredictable, and the swollen sea made it difficult to row. We were lost yet again, and now there was no west wind to blow us home. For 6 days and 6 nights we struggled miserably on, and on the 7th morning we were once more in sight of land. We sailed along the coast until we came to a city with a well-protected harbor overlooked by tall cliffs. I watched the rest of the fleet pass through the narrow harbor entrance and drop their anchors in the still, sheltered waters. Then I ordered my own crew to pull into the rocks just outside the harbor, where I could conveniently send men ashore to spy out the land. I sent 3 men to find out what they could. It was not long before 2 of them came running back to the ship with a terrible tale to tell. On the road to town, they had met a young woman who told them that the land was called Lystragonia, and that her father, Antiphates, was the king. She pointed out his palace, where they all went, in all innocence, to ask for shelter and provisions. Once inside the palace, they realized they had made a horrible mistake. The Lystragonians were giants, like the Cyclops, and just as savage. Antiphates seized one of my men and tore them apart. The other 2, my trusted cousin Euryclus and his friend Polites, just barely managed to escape. As they finished their story, hundreds of giant Lystragonians appeared on the cliff overlooking the harbor and began hurling huge rocks down onto the ships below. My men struggled desperately to haul in the anchors and get their ships underway, but they were too late. The entire fleet was smashed apart by the bombardment, and the survivors were speared like fish and cooked alive on spits by the cruel giants. Because my own ship was moored outside of the harbor, we were able to slip away unnoticed and unharmed. But our own escape was a joyless affair. We brooded over the loss of so many fine comrades and shuddered at the memory of the unspeakable sight we had seen. After 2 more miserable days at sea, we reached land again and found a small natural harbor where we moored our ship and disembarked. There we just lay on the beach for 2 days and nights, overcome with sorrow and exhaustion. At dawn on the 3rd day, while my men still slept, I took my sword and my spear and ventured out of the camp. I made my way through dense forest land, and until I came to a tall crag. I scrambled to the top and was able to see it for miles in every direction. We had come to a beautiful island covered in forests and hills with a wide central plain. A turquoise river meandered across the plain, and my eyes followed its sinuous path. And as my eyes followed its sinuous path, I saw wisps of smoke floating up from a distant cluster of buildings that I imagined were a small village. My first instinct was to go and investigate, but my sixth sense held me back. I decided to return to camp, tell my men what I had seen, and lead an expedition across the plain. But my first task would be to organize a hunting party. In our despair, we had not eaten for days. Not far from our camp, I came face to face with a majestic stag making its way down to the river. In the dense forest, it was instantly cornered, and sensing there was no time to escape, it lowered its great antlers and rushed straight at me. I was ready with my spear, which I drove through the animal's heart. I managed to drag the carcass back to camp, and soon we were enjoying a delicious feast of roasted venison washed down with fragrant wine from the hold of our ship. Now we began joking and laughing for the first time in days, and I told my men what I had seen from my vantage point on the crag. Their faces fell when I told them my plan. After what we had been through, their reluctance was understandable, but what was the alternative? We had no idea where we were, no idea which direction to take when we left the island, and no provisions except for wine. Of the 720 men under my command when we left Troy, only 45 remained. We split into 2 groups and drew sticks to see who would explore the island. My group was chosen to stay at the camp. At dawn the following day, the others, led by Euryclus, my trusted cousin, set off through the trees with heavy hearts. We waited anxiously all day until evening, when Euryclus came bursting out of the trees and collapsed at our feet. He was pale, trembling, and out of breath, and when at last he found his voice, his story filled us with gloom. Odysseus, my lord, we went as you told us, through the forest and onto the plain. We made our way across it until we came to a magnificent palace. Outside, the palace lions and mountain wolves roamed freely. To our amazement, instead of attacking us or running away, they approached us and fawned over us as though they expected something from us. They were obviously drugged or enchanted, and the look in their eyes was strangely human and inexpressibly sad. As we stood and stared at them, we heard a beautiful song coming from the palace. It was a woman's voice, and it sounded so wonderful that I immediately knew that it belonged to a goddess. We listened in wonder until the singing stopped. Then Polites yelled, and soon the shining doors of the palace opened. There stood the goddess. She smiled at us enticingly and invited us in. Without a moment's hesitation, my companions entered. I alone remained outside. I don't exactly know why, but she made me uneasy. There were the lions and wolves too. There was something about that look in their eyes that I couldn't get out of my mind. I sat on the ground with my back against the tree and considered what to do. I didn't have many choices. Rather than simply sit and wait or return to the camp alone, I decided to find out what was going on in the palace. I crept around the walls under cover of the trees until I saw a magnificent balcony overlooking the river, with steps leading up to it. I hurried up the steps, praying I wouldn't be seen, and peered through the great windows that looked over the balcony. I found myself looking into the main hall of the palace, where I could see my comrades with the goddess and her mates. At first, everything appeared to be normal. They were laughing and talking as they ate and drank, and I began to think that I'd been an idiot not to go in with them. Before long, however, their eyes glazed over and they slumped drunkenly in their seats. The goddess then pulled out a wand and touched them one after another. They ran around on all fours, grunting like pigs. Their faces began to sprout snouts and bristles. Together with her maids, the goddess drove them out to her sties beyond the palace wall. When she returned, I crept down to the sties to see what had happened. I found, to my horror, that our comrades had been turned into swine. Only their eyes remained human, and when I saw their desperate, pleading look, I realized what it was about the lions and the wolves that had troubled me so. However, there was nothing I could do to help them, and I was terrified of being caught myself. I managed to slip away unnoticed and ran straight back here. When Euryclus had finished, my men began weeping and groaning for their lost comrades. For me, the despair had turned to anger while I listened to the story. I was in no mood for tears. I leaped to my feet, grabbed my sword, and asked Euryclus to lead me to the palace. He fell to his knees and begged me not to go. He was clearly too terrified to help, so I left the camp alone. As I made my way through the forest and across the plain, As I approached the palace, a beautiful young man appeared out of nowhere. His golden sandals and golden wand told me that he was Hermes, son of great Zeus and Maia, the messenger of the gods. Unluckiest of men, he said, seizing hold of my hand, I've come to help you, for without my help, the enchantress Circe will turn you into a pig like the rest of your men, to wallow in her sties until you die. The god bent down and pulled a plant out of the ground. Its flower was milk white, its root was black as night. This is moly, Hermes said, holding the plant out to me. Moly is a magic herb that will protect you from Circe's drugs and spells. When she strikes you with her wand, you must draw your sword and threaten to kill her. She will ask you to forgive her and offer to make love to you. This you must accept, for no mortal should refuse the bed of a goddess. However, first make her swear the divine oath that she will do you no harm and that she will release your men. Otherwise, she will have you at her mercy. Hermes then flew up into the sky and disappeared as suddenly as he had come. Encouraged by his words and his magic gift, I walked past the enchanted wolves and lions at the shining doors of Circe's palace. A lovely song came from within, but I shut my ears to it and beat loudly on the doors. Soon they opened and Circe appeared. She was even lovelier than I had imagined. Noble stranger, she said in a voice of night and honey, you are welcome to Circe's house. Then she took me by the hand and led me into the great hall. I looked around nervously, sensing the danger I was in. The hall was full of beautiful cloths that Circe had woven, and in patterns as intricate and delicate as spiders' webs. As the goddess mixed my wine with her stupefying potions, I had the unpleasant sensation I was a juicy fly that she had enticed into her web. Now, noble stranger, please try this, said Circe softly, handing me a golden cup. I think you'll like it. She smiled as I drank it, trusting the moly to protect me. Immediately, Circe was upon me with her wand. There, stupid man, become the pig you really are. I'll drive you to my sties where you can root around in the dirt with the others. I drew my sword before she had finished speaking. Now I held it to her throat. Circe shrieked, fell to the ground, and clasped her arms around my knees. Noble stranger, forgive me. I thought you were another wretched man begging at my doorstep. Now I see that I was wrong to despise you. She lifted her head and gazed imploringly into my eyes. No man has ever resisted my drugs and spell before. You must be Odysseus himself, for Hermes has always warned me that you would come. Now that you're here, please let me welcome you as not only a great hero deserves. Put away your bright sword and come to my bed, and I will make you forget your sorrow and your suffering. Lovely Circe, I replied coldly, without lowering my sword. How can you expect me to trust you? First, you try to drug me and cast your vile spells. Now you offer to love me. Meanwhile, my dear companions grunt helplessly in your sties. Only the gods know how many miserable souls wander this island, trapped in the alien bodies of lions and wolves. Once you have me in your bed naked and without my sword, what's to stop you from bewitching me too? No, first you must swear a divine oath to free my men and do nothing more to harm us. Circe swore the oath and led me out to the sties and told me to fling open the doors. As the swine came running out one by one, she touched them with her wand. At once they changed back into the shape of my comrades. They looked lost and shaken, but they were younger and more handsome than I remembered. It took them a few moments to recover, but when they saw me standing next to Circe, they were overjoyed and wept as I embraced them. Even Circe was affected. She interrupted us, saying, "Noble Odysseus, son of Laertes, why don't you go back to your camp and fetch the rest of your men? If you stow your ship and your belongings in the caves above the beach, they'll be perfectly safe. Then bring your men back to my palace. My maids and I will bathe you and entertain you and serve you delicious wine and sumptuous food. I hope then you'll be able to forgive me and that we can be friends. You won't regret it, I promise you." Bad luck and disappointment had haunted us since we left Troy. Most of our companions had died hideous, violent deaths. The suffering and hardship we had endured now was making the temptation of Circe's palace irresistible. Leaving the men I had rescued in the tender hands of Circe's maids, I went back to the camp. I had arrived barely in time. Our comrades had given up on us and were preparing to sail. As soon as they saw me, they rushed up to me and overwhelmed me with questions and embraces. They could hardly have been more excited than if we had finally landed in Ithaca. When I had calmed them down and explained the situation, only Euryclus was reluctant to come with me. He shouted to get our attention. "It's crazy to think of going back. We'll all be at the cruel witch's mercy. What makes you think she'll keep her promise? She'll just laugh at us and turn us back into pigs." "Euryclus," I replied, "if you want to stay here on your own, then stay. But the rest of us are going to Circe's palace to enjoy ourselves and forget our sorrows." Then, afraid that I had been too hard on them, I put my arms around his shoulders and spoke more gently. "Come, dear cousin, think of what you went through as bad for you. It's over now, believe me. Circe has sworn a divine oath not to harm us, and if she breaks it, Zeus will punish her." Reluctantly, Euryclus agreed to come. The rest of my men were in a hurry to rejoin their lost comrades, and we quickly reached the palace. We were delighted to be back together, and our happy cries echoed through the great hall. Even Euryclus became himself again when he realized that his nightmare was over. Circe was as good as her word. We were all bathed in scented baths and wrapped in dazzling clothes she had made herself. Then a magnificent feast was set before us, and wine of fragrance that would have delighted the gods. Later, Circe took me by the hand and led me to her bed. My men were left to enjoy the company of her maids. Enchanted by pleasure, we stayed in Circe's palace for 1 year. I had forgotten about my home and my wife until one day my men came up to me and told me that it was time to leave. I immediately knew that they were right. When I told her, Circe became sad, and I thought for a moment she would try to prevent us, but she was resigned to our decision. If you're determined to leave now, then so be it. I'm afraid that your way home won't be easy. Poseidon still seeks to destroy you. What's more, his brother Zeus has decreed that you must descend to the underworld and visit the spirits of the dead before you can return home." "But, sweet Circe," I replied, dismayed, "how can I possibly go to the grim house of Hades? No one has ever been and returned to tell the tale." "It will find you," said Circe as she clasped my trembling hand. "Raise your mast, set your sail, and the north wind will take you there. At the entrance to the underworld, you must sacrifice a ram and a black ewe, which I will give you. Their blood will call up to the spirits of the dead. Burn the sheep and pray to Hades and Persephone, the gods of the underworld. Then the spirits will come back to refresh themselves, or then the spirits will talk to you. When your visit is over, come back here to refresh yourselves before your journey home." We sat in silence and waited for the dawn. There was nothing left to say or do. At daybreak, I led my men down to the beach. We dragged our ship to the water and checked the timbers and the rigging. Then we loaded our treasures into the hold and headed out to sea in dread. For who could set sail for the land of the dead and not be sick at heart?